Hi there, everyone. My name is Taseen.
And my name's Celine. Welcome to the Prescription for Progress podcast. We're two medical students passionate about the intersection of politics and medicine, exploring ways to advocate for our colleagues and patients. Each episode, we dive into pressing healthcare policy issues, share stories from those navigating the political landscape, and discuss actionable steps to drive meaningful change. Together, we'll unpack the current events that are shaping healthcare access and outcomes and learn from experts in the field to find ways for people to get involved on the ground.
And in today's episode, we would like to welcome Dr. Lauren Beene. Dr. Beene is a general pediatrician who practices in the Cleveland area. She is also the co-founder and executive director of Ohio Physicians for Reproductive Rights and is a leader of Protect Choice Ohio, the grassroots coalition that played a key role in gathering the signatures needed to place Issue 1, protecting abortion rights in Ohio, on the 2023 general election ballot. She now serves as a member of the executive committee for Ohioans United for Reproductive Rights, a broad-based, nonpartisan coalition conducting the campaign to enshrine reproductive freedom in the Ohio Constitution. With that said, Dr. Beene, that's a lengthy list of credentials, and we are excited to have you on the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm honored to join today.
So I know that we did give a little bit of a blurb here, but tell us a little bit more about yourself and in particular the organization that you founded, Ohio Physicians for Reproductive Rights.
Sure. So as you mentioned, I'm a general pediatrician. I went to Case for med school and I did my I did my peds residency at Rainbow. I was a chief. And then I started my current job, where I work as a community pediatrician. Have a very lucky to have the job that I have. It's really great. And I wasn't really involved in you know, the repro world or organizing. I always considered myself an advocate as a pediatrician. Part of being a pediatrician is being an advocate for, kids who don't know how to talk and can't communicate with you. So that's just sort of part of pediatrics, but it didn't really get, head first into organizing until the Dobbs decision in 2022. Um, the summer of 2022, when the Dobbs decision happened on that Friday, I came to work on Monday, and that Monday morning, before I even started seeing patients, I was getting phone calls from parents of patients and patients, and it was very clear to me that without guaranteed access to reproductive health care, including abortion, my patients were going to suffer, and it was going to much more severely impact people who have less financial resources, people who already are facing barriers to care. And I felt like that was a great injustice, but I didn't know what to do about it. So but I managed to make some connections through a women physician Facebook group. Facebook can be very helpful sometimes, although stressful other times. And long story short, ended up forming an organization called Ohio Physicians for Reproductive Rights. That in itself is a big, long story, but that organization brought together a few thousand physicians around the state of Ohio, from really including all specialties, people who were doctors that were worried that their patients were going to suffer from not having access to abortion care and everything relating to it. And we ended up leading the charge to get the reproductive freedom ballot measure on the before the voters in the general election in November of 2023. That thankfully was successful and is now what is protecting our access to abortion, IVF, contraception, and everything else related to it in Ohio. So there were a lot of people that were involved in that. It was an incredible grassroots movement uprising, and I was honored to be there with so many awesome people making a change.
Yes, that amendment was such an outstanding achievement, and it was really exciting being a medical student in Ohio while that process was happening. I guess this is kind of a broad question, but in what ways do you see politics kind of shape medical practice? And in what ways do like medical professionals get involved, whether it be through lobbying or um, having connections with other interprofessional groups?
Mhm. Those are two huge questions.
Yes.
But they're good and very important questions. I'm glad you're asking them. So the first question was, how do politics shape medicine? Oh, well, um, a lot. Unfortunately, the people who write the laws that allow us to be able to provide care without going to jail, regardless of what sort of care that is, um, a lot of those people have no knowledge of medicine. Many of them are um, legislators. A lot of them great, very helpful, but not always the case. And unfortunately, there are a lot of areas of healthcare that have over time, I mean, just have become political because political movements have latched on to them. So, one way that politics makes healthcare impacts healthcare is when fringe political movements latch on to a sensitive topic such as abortion or gender affirming care or prep for HIV prevention or things that sometimes make some people uncomfortable to think about. They'll rile up similarly um, dissenting, not always supportive folks, and then they'll rally behind trying to stop healthcare, that particular type of healthcare from being available, often for political gain. And so, with regard to abortion access, abortion has been really morphed into such a hot topic by radical right-wing extremists who have used it knowing that they can move a base toward leading toward more restrictive types of laws um, and get those people to follow not just wanting to stop abortion, but to also move behind other right-wing political things. And it becomes a much huger entity than it needs to be. Like abortion is healthcare. It is just part of what we do as health care professionals. It is basic medical care, but it's been vilified. And so that we're up against that. And vilified by people who vilify some of it for they really believe are religious reasons, but then even more dangerously are the people who could care less about abortion, could care less about whether it's right or wrong or whatever, but all they know is that this is an issue that's going to get them more power. And they run with it, and that's when it becomes very challenging. And the same things happen with transgender, gender affirming care, where it's, you know, pretty straightforward basic health care, and it's fairly small percentage of people that need it, but it's such a trigger for some people that it has been exploited um, to the harm of transgender people, but at the same time, at great political gain for extremists. So I think that that's one way that politics impact what we're doing is that we can unfortunately be influenced by extremist politics. Um, other ways that politics impact healthcare is, we live in a society that's governed by laws, and the laws are written by lawmakers who are mostly politicians. And like those laws are often argued in courts by lawyers, but it's the politicians, our elected representatives, who are writing the laws that set the boundaries for what is and is not legal. And I'd never thought about that when I was in medical school. I just assumed like, oh, whoever says what we can and can't do in healthcare would be the people who are establishing the science. It would be the people at the NIH or, you know, anywhere but the state house, like, but, you know, we have the people who are establishing the science and how to help people and, what makes sense from a scientific standpoint. But then that knowledge and information ends up having to fit into a legal framework of what is legal and what is not legal. And that how that is defined and delineated greatly depends on who is in public office and who we have elected to be our representatives and who we have elected to be our Supreme Court justices who are interpreting the laws of the people. And so healthcare depends on politics, unfortunately. And we need to know that, and we can be very mad about it because it's very frustrating, but it is the way that it is. And we, as healthcare professionals, physicians, you know, if we aren't there at the forefront in the political arena trying to influence things, people who don't know anything about healthcare and might have ill motivations will be dictating how we can practice healthcare.
Yeah, I think that it's really interesting how you point out several dichotomies. One, that individuals who are and bodies that are responsible for dictating healthcare tend to be operating without necessarily as exhaustive an understanding
Yeah.
that you as a physician do. So, one of the things that I think gets lost in all of this, and you've also mentioned how causes such as abortion restriction or rights get co opted by movements and that get swept up with other causes. One of the things that we want to shed a little bit of light on and would love to hear what you have to share on it are on the topic of reproductive justice as a whole.
Mhm.
What are some of the effects of reproductive rights restrictions beyond abortion access itself?
Yes, so that is a great question. So reproductive justice, just for anybody who's, not super familiar with that concept, um, is it's really a concept that was established by Black women activists, and it goes beyond this issue of reproductive rights or reproductive healthcare access, and it focuses more. On a broader concept of the right to have children, the right to not have children, and the right to raise your families in safe communities. And it spans maternal health, racial disparities, economic justice, and access to reproductive health care, and is much, much broader than um, how we often think of the, you know, classical, just fighting for our right to have health care. And that's important um, for so many reasons. One, you can fight for the right to have health care legally. But if you are a Black woman who is living in a neighborhood where you don't have transportation reliably, you don't have funds to be able to get the care that you need, and you don't have the support to be able to care for your children that you do have, and you need to pursue reproductive health care to get an abortion or whatever it is, that's your business. If you are living in a world that provides the opposite of support for you, whether or not you have the legal right to get health care, to get an abortion is doesn't matter, I mean, of course it matters, but like you still have to be able to get it. And I think also like just there's so much oppression that comes with having children, which as a white woman, I can't really talk about that much, but like I've learned that women are criminalized for loss of pregnancy, usually Black and brown women. Um, Women are often, I don't want to say coerced, but like Black and brown women will often say that they're encouraged more forcefully to start contraception than are white women. So like sometimes Black women will actually tell you that like they feel like in comparison to their white friends, they're often just almost discouraged from having children. Well, they'll say like, oh, you need to go on birth control. You need to go, make sure that you're, not having more children, which where that's coming from is its own conversation. Whereas like a white woman will go to the doctor and will be told, so when are you going to start having children? All of that kind of plays into this concept of racism and justice and injustice. And what's the messages in the system that you are existing in that are influencing the care that is offered and the care that's encouraged and the care that's available. I think that, I will never pretend to be an expert in reproductive justice, but I do think that it's very important to recognize that just because we have a legal right to something does not mean that it is something that all people are going to have equitable access to. And we need to make sure that we are mindful of that. And we need to make sure that the people who are leading the movements are people who understand that. While I can do my best to lead in the way that I can lead, I'm never going to be able to lead something that will be truly effective in the reproductive justice world in the way that a woman of color could, just because I don't know what it's like to be that person. And reproductive justice, I think, serves to help us understand that.
Yeah, I think it's really important to remember, like, in this conversation around reproductive justice, we have to consider other forms of oppression, not just sexism, but also racism, like you mentioned, and classism, and just all of these disparities interlocking together. And I think Ohio specifically is really unique because it was a former swing state that has become solidly more red as the years go by. And Cleveland is especially unique because it's an incredibly redlined city with immense socioeconomic disparity and racial disparity. So I was wondering what your experience has been advocating not just for reproductive rights, but for children in the Ohio area.
Um, that's a good question too. I think so most of the like community-wide impactful work that I've done, I think has been more relating to the repro work recently. I think advocating for children is really probably something that I do more on just like an individual basis in my job. And that, is just part of being a pediatrician, is advocating for children, visit after visit after visit, and finding ways to, not just figure out what's going on with this child that's having some sort of a problem, is experiencing pain or is sick, but, communicating that in a way that is palatable for a stressed, scared family, and finding ways to, more than one way to solve a problem, not getting hung up on like how I think things need to be done to help a child, but to make sure that like we're using science and evidence-based medicine, but that exists in a framework that works for a family. And so I think that when I think about how I'm being an advocate for children, it's really in those individual encounters where I try to just do my best for that child and that family together. I think other ways that I am advocating for children, I'm involved in a variety of other advocacy groups. I'm on the board of the um, Committee to Protect Healthcare, which does a great deal to protect our access to healthcare broadly and remove barriers that can make it hard for anybody of any age to get healthcare. I'm also on the council of the Ohio State Medical Association, which is our state medical society. And through that, there's not a whole lot of pediatricians who are involved in the Ohio State Medical Association. So if there are any interested potentially future pediatricians here, that's a good place to, go and kind of see how you can help things for children in the state of Ohio. And then I think that like the work that I'm doing in the repro space, I didn't appreciate before Dobbs that, not having access to abortion is not just an adult problem. It's largely a problem that affects adolescents, um, you know, for many reasons. And, both in that they're minor patients that might find themselves needing an abortion. Um, but they're also, the parents of my patients, um, and that entire family that's impacted by the loss of access to healthcare. And so advocating for these basic fundamental things, helps everyone. It helps the whole family, helps the whole community. And that's another really important part of pediatrics is trying to keep the whole community healthy so that the children can thrive.
I mean, it makes sense. One of the maxims that I've always heard is treating the child is like requires treating the entire family, right?
Mhm.
And everything that you've described goes to show just how multifaceted the effects of health policy on and changes to it are on not just the one who's making that decision, but their support system,
Mhm.
and that the people who have to make decisions regarding things like abortion, not all they can some of them are kids, some of them are
Yeah.
teenagers, right? Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
so
Really young kids. I mean, and which is sickening to think about, but it's like this is a really complex issue on so many like social and I don't know, just it is really it's never I think that when people try to make sweeping laws about things like abortion, they don't like to think about the terrible things that happen and the the situations that are, affect not the majority of people, a small segment of people, but still a lot of people. Um, and when those people who have suffered greatly, that often includes our most vulnerable populations, which often includes children, when you take away access, those are the people that are hurt the most. And it's not just the children, it's the whole family. So yeah, it is. It's an unfortunately awful and complicated thing, but that's life has these things that's what we deal with as doctors, right? A lot of the times everything's great, but every once in a while things are really terrible. And we have to be able to help our patients no matter the situation.
well, that's the beauty of the profession, that you're able to both the beauty, the curse, and the responsibility that you have to serve people at their most vulnerable, right?
Hmm.
Something that I was curious about regarding, I mean, you mentioned so many different ways in which these changes, these things that are now in the crosshairs of political discourse, affect not only medicine, but pediatrics in particular. I was curious to hear, have you, over like the last few years, what effects have you seen in the clinic itself, be it with regards to people struggling to get access to things or people having feelings about certain things?
Hmm. Um, well, so I've worked so I started residency in 2015, which wasn't that long ago. And then I was a chief, and then I started my first job in 2019. And then COVID hit, which was crazy. Um, and then, um, and then here we are now. So, I haven't been doing this for that long, but things that I have definitely felt are um, honestly, in the last like 2 months since our RFK became the potential head of Health and Human Services, I've had more patients that previously had no problems with vaccines come in and ask me, so, so and so told me that vaccines are associated with X, Y, or Z, or, people that like previously weren't nervous about vaccines because vaccines were safe and there have been countless studies showing that, are now nervous about vaccines. And, you know, while it is important to be critical thinkers and make sure that we understand what we're doing with this particular problem, it can become a true disaster if people, if more people start refusing vaccines. And so that's been the most recent thing that I have really noticed, that is really stressing me out. um, Other than that, other things that have changed. Pre and post COVID worlds are quite different. Um, After COVID, um, I think that we've become a little bit more like almost like open-minded in some ways, where bef- in medicine before COVID, I felt like the illness scripts all kind of made sense. So, this was the time of year that this virus happened, and this is what this always looks like. And, this is never this and this is never that. But I honestly feel like COVID did such a number on the natural cycle of viruses and things that after COVID, we've had to be a little bit more flexible. Like, well, it's this time of year. You usually wouldn't see this virus this time of year, but it's post-COVID, so anything's possible. So, um, that's been another thing that I think has been interesting. Um, yeah, I don't know. There's lots of stuff. Like, um, were you thinking anything in particular?
No, I just wanted to hear your experiences and what you've seen, what you've witnessed being, a frontline physician and advocate. And it seems like you've seen, I mean, the vaccine, the discourse around vaccinations, as well as what is seen as um, sound medical treatment in
Hmm.
this new regime, is interesting to say the least. And it is most certainly eye-opening to hear that you're seeing or feeling a tangible shift in patients' concerns and attitudes towards such measures.
Hmm.
Something
Yeah.
that Another thing that's interesting is seeing so in this case, it seemed to be where I wonder if it was a bit of chicken or the egg in terms of people's attitudes making such regime changes more reliable, or as you mentioned, the appointment of RFK leading to people asking more questions. Where did you see what did you see here with regards to the chicken or the egg question, I suppose?
With regard to like vaccine hesitancy,
Yeah.
um, I think that it's mostly just further propagation of misinformation and fear mongering that's spreading further um, than it had been before, with the unfortunate normalization of the fringe as it takes over the government. I'm a little bit jaded, but yeah, no, I think that unfortunately what used to be on the periphery is now leading us, and that is a problem. And I think that that just makes people, because again, it's okay, it's great. Your questioning is good, but like when your sources are crazy people who are in charge, it becomes really hard to know, okay, what is reliable information and what is not? Who do I trust? Um, and that's unfortunately, like it's understandable, and that I think is really very scary when we have the people who have been on the fringe who are now leading our healthcare institutions. But one other thing that I have noticed that's happened, I think since I was in med school, which again was not that long ago, is that doctors are getting better at speaking up. So when I was in medical school and before, basically until COVID, actually basically until the Dobbs decision, I pretty much spent most of my time trying to like not ruffle feathers too much and just kind of like get through my day and do what I needed to do to take care of my patients. And I did, and I wasn't really paying, honestly, didn't really feel like I had time to, but I wasn't really paying attention to all of the craziness that was happening in the world, which was definitely happening, but like it wasn't in my, like right in front of me. Um, but we've had so many awful things happen in the last few years that have involved us and our patients, our ability to deliver healthcare, our basic fundamental rights, and have been terrible to entire communities, and have been upending our basic trust. Well, not our, I mean, we still have our basic trust in science, but society's trust in science, that the medical community, in particular physicians and medical students and residents and everybody, are becoming more bold. And like this show is awesome. I love that you're doing this. And like I think that as future physicians and physicians, you know, entering careers at this time in history, um, we should continue doing what you're doing, which is having conversations about everything, including difficult things, and recognizing that like our voice matters as doctors in this, because no matter how crazy things get, you are still going to be the person who's having conversations with a patient in the exam room in a way that like is still very special. You still are helping people when they're sick. You are still the person that people are coming to and they put their trust into, separate from the whole system. And so I think that, the more that we learn to say what we feel is right, stand up for what we know is true, and understand that that is just part of being a doctor, and doing that on a small level and a huge level, the we as physicians and future physicians, I think, can eventually help to make healthcare a whole lot better.
Absolutely. It's becoming more and more important for people both inside the medical community and outside the medical community to make their voices heard, especially because we are seeing the politics shaping medicine so much more, and it's becoming so much more apparent. So like you mentioned, there has been a lot of upheaval recently since the election. I was just wondering how your organization has been navigating the new regime and what certain measures, both on a federal level and on a state level, people have been trying to implement.
Um, so, I think for our group, Ohio Physicians for Reproductive Rights, there's still so much uncertainty,
Yeah.
like I don't really know what's gonna happen. Um, but I am ready to act. We are continuing to keep our base engaged. Um, and I think also, we actually just we're having doing a webinar series. And we had a webinar recently that was on uh what do you do if ICE shows up to your office? And we did that because, a lot of more established, larger, more powerful institutions have a hard time having seminars on things like that because they get government funding. And for us, we don't. So we have a little bit more liberty. Um, and things like, what do you do if ICE shows up to your office? It applies to the world of reproductive rights, right? Because what happens if ICE shows up to your abortion clinic? What happens if ICE shows up to your OBGYN clinic? What happens if women start having babies at home because they're afraid to go to the doctor? And how does that fit into the framework of reproductive justice? So we're kind of not really expanding our narrative a little bit. We're just trying to see, like, where can we use our voices to help where we are needed today? Um, and honestly, that is like a day by day thing. But by no means are we like, I think that what makes our group kind of special is that we are our own group. And, on the topic of, using our voices as physicians, um, we're in an era where there's a lot of grassroots organizing. And one of the really beautiful things about grassroots organizing is it's like you are your own organization. Like you are the voice of the people that have come together. And that is how things change, is through grassroots activism, becoming friends with people who have power, and working together. Um, but right now is a time when the institutions are having a really hard time, because they're under incredible, scary pressures and they don't want to shut down. And this is a great time for the little guys like us to amplify our voices so loudly. So as much as this time is really sucky, it is also a time when we can really, continue to fight and try to make a difference. And that's what we're trying to do.
Yeah, absolutely. The grassroots movements are more important now than ever. Speaking more about the federal legislations, there have been a number that have been introduced to the House. I was wondering if you could comment on them, particularly the ones about the pro-women's healthcare centers, and the House Resolution 722, which hopes to implement equal protection under the Fourth Amendment of the Constitution to the right of life for born and preborn human people.
So I will admit I am not so good at like specific legislation and numbers. So what was the first one?
Yeah, so the first one, it's House Resolution 7.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it has language about how healthcare for women should also address the needs of men, families, and communities as they relate
Mhm.
to women's healthcare. And they also mention something called the Pro Women's Healthcare Centers, which has certified healthcare centers nationwide that meets its standards for high quality life affirming care.
Okay. So I think so I'm not a lawyer. And so this is one of the things that I fully embrace, is that like I know what I know and then there are people who know what they know, and it's good to meet those people so you can work together so they can help explain things like your five tips and then figure out, okay, how does this apply to what I know? So what I say about these things is not like the end all be all, but my understanding of the House Resolution 7 is that that's the one that's trying to block like federal funds for abortion, I think. And they, by cutting off financial support from anything federal to anything that could be conceived as relating to abortion, that's a way to just reduce access, make barriers greater, make things more expensive for people who already can't afford care. And like everything, this is the attack on abortion and reproductive health care is like there have been some monumental fundamental changes that have been catastrophic, such as the Dobbs decision. But then everything else is like death by a thousand cuts. And so I think this is part of that strategy of they're just throwing everything there to see how they can over time make it harder and harder and harder for people to get access to care. So that's my really superficial and probably not totally 100% um, accurate understanding of House Resolution 7. And then the centers, are those like crisis pregnancy centers that you're referring to?
Yeah, it appears based on the phrasing of the resolution that they want to legitimize them more and
Oh.
have set standards that are separate from ACOG,
Ugh.
which is, yeah,
Ugh,
definitely a
terrible.
terrifying concept.
Terrifying. So those places are awful. And in Ohio, like we already, so much of our taxpayer money goes to pay for crisis pregnancy centers to exist. And all they do is make people feel bad, indoctrinate them into things that are false, delay care. Um, they misrepresent themselves, and people will go to those crisis pregnancy centers, which are run by anti-choice people entities, thinking that they're going to get reproductive health care because a lot of those places really do seem like medical facilities, but they're not. Um, and that's dangerous. And the fact that our taxpayer money goes to fund those is appalling. So I imagine that by trying to set these standards, they're just trying to like legitimize them more, which is terrible. Yeah, it's illegal. It should be illegal. It's not illegal. It should be illegal. It'd be like pretending you're a dentist when really you're like a shoe store. It just doesn't it just doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, especially when like an actual abortion clinic, it's so difficult to access for people who are in a major city. And oftentimes people have to cross state borders just to get a licensed abortion provider.
Yeah.
But I can imagine that this would make this crisis so much worse.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely.
I think some of the things that really concern me as well is just it seems so if you don't know what a crisis pregnancy center is and where it falls under the schema of, established medical practice, evidence-based medical practice, i.e., the three of us had a visceral reaction to not following ACOG standards, but to someone who may not necessarily be as versed in these nuances, it may sound like an option that is appealing, if not helpful, especially considering that it's titled crisis pregnancy healthcare centers.
Yeah.
And and now it seems that they're rebranding it to what's called pro women's healthcare centers, which is some of their text that they have described include a need to counter the tremendous push for abortion, that understanding fertility is a fundamental tenet of true women's healthcare. Um, and also acknowledging the importance of spirituality in overall health. I imagine that it seems as though these organizations are a way to not only legitimize the harmful things that you and Celine mentioned that crisis healthcare centers do, but to impose a set of values.
Mhm.
Something that I'm curious about, if I may ask, since on the interacting with patients level, how do you assess and evaluate the different, if you will, value sets that patients may come in with? And how do they react to these discussions?
That's another big question. You guys ask good questions. And so just like kind of in general.
Yeah, in
Yeah,
general, or as it relates to the things that we've been talking about.
for sure. Yeah. Um, well, so as a general pediatrician, specifically the topic of abortion doesn't come up that much. It comes up sometimes. But like anything, you know, I my job is to help the patient and their family, if their family is, involved at that time. Um, my job is to help people make the decisions that's the best decisions for them. To make sure that people have the information that they need, that is delivered in a way that is not biased and not leaving something out that's important. It's not it is in no way my role to encourage somebody to do something. I can, it's my job to connect with people and establish trust, to be somebody that they can rely on, and to make sure that they have everything that they need to make the decisions that are right for them, with regard to their health and safety. And in peds, it's a little bit harder, right? Because, there's this whole maturation of the brain and, assent and consent, um, and all of the laws. But overall, no matter what it is, my job is not to make decisions for people. It's to help people make those decisions, have the information they need to make the decisions that they need. And, I think that when the Dobbs decision happened, one of my patients, was who I had been trying to help, was a 16-year-old girl who was pregnant and didn't want to be pregnant. And the week before the Dobbs decision, I was doing everything I could to help her make the right decision for her. And she wanted to have conversations with both abortion providers, so OBGYNs at an abortion clinic and OBGYNs not in an abortion clinic and like a regular healthcare, not right, I shouldn't say that because there's not the same, just like it, you know,
Yeah.
in our right, typical where you would be rotating. Um, to make sure that she had that information from both sources. So I had set her up with an OBGYN that she was going to see like 2 weeks or so after the Dobbs decision, approximately. She had already been seen in the abortion clinic. And that Monday morning, I had to call her and say, and she was about 8 weeks pregnant. So it was very likely already too late because her fetus might have already had a heartbeat. And so I had to call her and say, if you are thinking about having an abortion and you feel like that's what's right for you, you cannot wait to see the OBGYN that you're scheduled to see to have that other conversation that was so important to you. If you want to have an abortion, you need to go back to the abortion clinic today, and it might already be too late. And I had never I had never had to give a patient advice that contradicted my own medical advice. My personal advice was you need to go back there today if you want to have an abortion. When a couple of days prior, my medical advice was, sure, that's a great idea. Let's make sure that you're informed so that you can make the decision that's right for you. Um, and that felt wrong. Um, so yeah, so that's how I see my job. And that applies to pretty much every conversation that I have with patients.
That is such a that story is just really it's such a difficult scenario for the patient to navigate, for you to navigate, and it's even with all parties acting like your patient was looking to get a variety of perspectives and make an informed decision. Apologies if I missed something really quickly, but what was
Okay.
it that flipped? Did you get results showing the age of the fetus that led to the in-between kind of switch between saying that's a great idea to, hey, I think that if you want this, you should do it today?
Yeah. So what happened was she was approximately 8 weeks along by last menstrual period and probably by ultrasound done at the abortion clinic the previous week. And then the Dobbs decision happened. So then
Oh,
suddenly she had so the law went from you can have an abortion up until the point of fetal viability to, well, that's what it says now, but and up until like 20 or so, 21, 22 weeks to you can no longer have an abortion if there's a detectable fetal heartbeat, which is itself ridiculous because there's actually not a heart at 6 weeks. It's electrical impulses in the like cardiac cells. So if they can detect the electrical impulses in the cardiac cells in the fetus at which occurs around 6 weeks, then it became illegal to have an abortion. So, and we lived and so that happened in the summer of 2022, and in Ohio, we existed in that framework of law for 11 weeks. So I had to call her on that Monday and say that, you know, it might actually already be too late because you might already be at the point where you can pick up those electrical impulses. But in case it's not, and if you want to have an abortion, you have to go back to the clinic.
so this is like we talked earlier in like broad sweeping generalizations, right? How it impacts stuff. But this right here to me, it's like this is how the difference in these laws plays out for one woman.
Yeah.
She goes from being able to take her time to speak to people, to
Mhm.
really think about how she feels, to you have to do this today.
Yeah.
That changed over the span of a week, not through anything medical, but through a legal decision.
Yeah. Do you want to hear the worst story that I heard?
Absolutely.
Well, I've heard a lot of terrible stories, but so kind of on the how things changed so abruptly. on that Friday, June 24th, 2022. Um, so I have a friend who's an OBGYN who's an abortion provider in Ohio. And at her clinic, she saw a woman who was like 35 or something, and she came in, and this is not how it is currently in Ohio, thanks to the Reproductive Freedom Amendment, but there was still the law in place that you had to see an abortion provider and then wait 24 hours before you could actually like get even like the medication for abortion, because you had to have 24 hours to think about it, which is so ridiculous. But anyway, so she had her first appointment with the abortion provider on Friday morning, the 24th. And when she was there, everybody noticed that she looked really sad. And the staff, before she left, said, "Hey, are you okay? Just make sure you're like safe." Um, and she said, "Well, I just found out that I have stage 3 melanoma. And I also found out that I'm 6 weeks pregnant, and I have a 5-year-old and a 2-year-old at home. And I don't know if I'm going to make it, but I want to start chemotherapy as soon as possible so that I can be here as long as I can for my kids. But I have to have an abortion first because I can't start chemo." So they said, "Okay, come back tomorrow. We will get you your medication so you can, move forward next week." Then the Dobbs decision happened that afternoon. So all of a sudden, that fetus had a heartbeat. It had an electrical impulse. So they had to call this woman and say, "I'm sorry, we can no longer help you." And then they had to help her leave the state to find a place out of state that she could get the pills to take. And they were very helpful, so it didn't delay her care a whole lot, at least by a few days. But like, can you imagine the moral injury experienced by that person? And that those kinds of stories happen over and over and over again. And that's where like the people who are making these laws have no idea the details and intricacies of, what situations are impacted by banning care. Um, and it's not just these extreme situations that are important. Like every situation is important. Everybody's decision is important, and their access for their own personal needs is important. But some of the things that happened during those weeks were just absolutely appalling.
That is that is harrowing to hear. Like that is someone making the decision to prolong her life as much as possible with so much on her plate. That was already difficult. And then it got even more difficult, and we had to cross state lines to get her that treatment. And
Mhm.
I can imagine many people in her position might not even have had the financial ability or time
Yeah.
to do that.
Well, and that's the thing with my patient, the 16-year-old girl who was pregnant. She was an African American girl from a neighborhood that doesn't have very much money. Wonderful neighborhood, very lovely, supportive people. But like, if she had to leave the state to get care, that would have been a big deal. And I was talking to her from our office in Solon, which is a wealthy community. And I was just sitting there thinking, like, God, if this girl has to leave the state to get an abortion, that's going to be very, very challenging for her and her family. Um, and I have a lot of patients that it would be a non-issue, and that I just could not stomach. So, you know, everybody should be able to get the care that they need when they need it.
We couldn't agree more. And we really appreciate the hard work that you've done, that you and every organization, every grassroots organization that you're a part of that are working to not only, I think it's one thing when you consider it as like an intellectual cause or as this is practicing evidence-based medicine, but really like making sure that people like your patient get the care they need and can have their lives on track. Um, that said, I know that you are incredibly busy. So grateful for you spending this time with us. We wanted to give one last chance. The floor is yours. Make any plug that you wish for physicians in training, anyone interested in all of this stuff.
Yeah,
What are some ways that quickly come to mind or causes that you want them to be involved in? Um, Shout them out.
totally. So I think that not that you need my advice, because you guys are all perfectly capable of doing amazing things and figuring it out on your own. But I think things that I would have benefited from hearing are you have so much more power than you realize. And you're trained in a system that doesn't always let you know how much power you have. And I think that as you are moving forward in your training and going out into the world to be doctors in the community, if something seems wrong, stand up, fight back, talk to everybody that you know. It only takes one pebble to create an avalanche, and you might feel as small as that pebble, but like that pebble can really make a huge change. And I just think that, you know, especially like I'm assuming you guys are probably Gen Z. Gen Z is my favorite. You guys are so much braver than everybody.
Oh,
Yeah, I
love
think
to hear that.
yeah, I mean I'm generalizing obviously, but like, you know, like I'm not that much older than you guys, but like we're growing up during a really crazy time. Especially and you're learning to be doctors during a really crazy time. And there's going to be a lot of times when you're going to realize things are wrong. And the right thing is always to stand up for what's right. And you can do that as a doctor, and it's going to be okay. And there will be people who will stand up beside you when they realize that somebody's being brave. So use that power.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Dr. Bean. We really appreciated talking to you today.
You're so welcome. Thank you for doing this podcast. You guys are awesome.
Please. What's awesome is the work that you have done and the expertise that you bring to the table, and hopefully everything that you're able to share. Obviously, you have greater venues than us, but we hope to see that work continue, and we'll support in whatever way we can.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. We're a team together.
Absolutely.
Alrighty. And that concludes our first episode of Prescription for Progress.